Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking Katie Kitamura's deeply unsettling novel, Audition. And we're going to explore this really radical idea the book presents, that your identity, it isn't some solid core you're born with and just get to keep forever. Actually, it's more like a super fragile narrative. It's something you have to constantly rehearse, constantly perform, and, most terrifyingly of all, it's something that is constantly being threatened by the people around you.
To map this all out, we've got 5 key areas we're hitting today. We'll start with the concept of the fragile narrative, look at performance versus reality, the usurpation of identity, family as careful collusion, and finally, acting to prove existence. We're going from the massive scale of the professional stage right down into the existential dread of our own living rooms. Let's get to it.
So, part 1, the fragile narrative. We have to start in the protagonist's professional world, the theater, because that's really what sets the stage for this complete unraveling of the self. Here is the absolute kicker in the universe Kitamura creates. The self is anything but permanent. Identity is literally just a story, and it is constantly in danger of being overwritten or honestly stolen entirely by other people. It takes active daily rehearsal. You basically have to put up a defensive shield every single day just to maintain who you are. Moving on to part 2, performance versus reality. This is where we see that fragile story build into this terrifyingly porous border between what is staged and what is actually real life.
The dilemma for the actor here is just fascinating. For our narrator, performance is the only lens she has to understand the world, but in the theater, she says, the air gets thin. Deep immersion in a role is like, well, it's like wading way too far into the ocean. It threatens to pull you under. You completely lose sight of the shore of reality, and you desperately have to remember how to come up for air if you want to survive the fiction.
And we see this horrifying collapse illustrated so brilliantly by a story the narrator tells about this aging actor in a film called Salvation. The guy gives this incredibly acclaimed, deeply visceral performance of a confused man. But here is the absolute tragedy of it. He wasn't acting, like, at all. It was just the real-life result of dementia happening right there on set. He was genuinely wandering around searching for lines he'd forgotten. The fiction had totally lost its protective powers, you know? The script was literally torn to pieces. But then there's this really deep paradox. Because while the stage can absolutely destroy your reality, performance can also be the only place the narrator actually feels whole. She talks about finding these brief, fleeting little moments under the stage lights where the gap between her private self and her public performed self just entirely collapses inward. For a second, she becomes a single, unified point of existence.
Which brings us to part 3. The usurpation of identity. Now we are zooming way down to the micro level to look at this intimate, genuinely chilling invasion of her identity by a young guy named Xavier.
Okay, Xavier's psychological takeover is so methodical, it's scary. Step 1, he takes an old interview about an abortion in her past, and he fundamentally misunderstands it. Step 2, he uses that misunderstanding to construct this total, unshakable delusion that she is his birth mother. And then steps 3 and 4, that's where you see his dedication. He actually goes back and studies her old films just to perfectly mimic her every move.
I mean, he isn't just lying to people, he is physically appropriating her. He perfectly steals this unconscious bodily gesture she has, this very specific soft exhalation paired with straightening her spine. He leverages their shared racial features as an anchor, basically weaponizing her own body language against her to make his twisted fantasy real. Xavier is essentially a master chameleon here. He molds his identity like clay to play the role of the archetypal son. And what makes it so dangerous is that he is flawless at it. He creates an illusion so solid that it fools everyone around them. He even manages to completely trick the narrator's own director, Anne. Xavier is literally using performance to force his fabricated identity into existence. All right, part 4, family is careful collusion. Let's pan out from the stage and that isolated, creepy dynamic. We need to look at everyday life and see how this performative stuff isn't just a problem for professional actors. It's actually the entire foundation of family life. So the narrator has this startling, kind of mind-blowing realization. Her own home life? It's just as staged as any theatrical play. She calls a family a careful collusion. And when you really think about it, it's almost absurd. A family unit only holds together as long as every single person actively agrees to stay inside the shared fantasy and read their lines from the exact same script. But what happens when someone decides to stop playing their part, when that agreement ends? Well, after an explosive confrontation where Xavier finally leaves, the illusion breaks, and the family home instantly devolves.
It's not a family anymore. It just becomes a physical room holding three completely separate, totally atomized individuals: the narrator, her husband Tomas, and Xavier. You can really see this breakdown in her husband Thomas. Normally, this guy is the picture of exquisite control and dignity, but in the presence of Xavier and his young friend Hannah, he just sheds that identity. He drops the mask entirely. He takes on this submissive, almost servant-like posture around their youth, and eventually he regresses into the shameful role of a dirty old man getting caught groping in the hallway. It's a complete devolution.
And it's not just him. Other characters use these social masks to manipulate the situation too. Xavier's friend Hannah steps perfectly into the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law. But make no mistake, this is a highly weaponized performance. She uses this impossibly polite, flawless mask to subtly torment the narrator and quietly usurp her place in her own home.
Which leads us into our final section, Part 5, Acting to Prove Existence. Let's tackle the massive existential realization at the core of this explainer. Why are we all performing these identities so desperately in the first place? It all boils down to one fundamental terror: the threat of invisibility. As the narrator is grappling with middle age and feeling herself slowly being erased from view, she starts reevaluating her entire life's work. And she realizes that her lifelong ambition to be seen on stage, that wasn't vanity, not at all. It was literally a survival mechanism. For her, being perceived by an audience was the only thing that proved her limbs were actually real when she touched them. Performance gave her a solid core. It was a shield that kept her physical being intact and protected her against the terrifying, chaotic turbulence of the emptiness she felt inside. And all of this builds to a truly chilling conclusion. Xavier literally forces the narrator into his own narrative. He writes a monologue for her, specifically casting her as a woman who can no longer distinguish between what is real and what is not real. It's incredibly claustrophobic. He traps her on a stage of his own making, perfectly weaponizing her already fragile grip on reality. But here is the incredible twist. As she stands there on that stage, performing the words Xavier wrote for her, everything comes full circle. She realizes that Xavier's terrifying, invasive ambition, it mirrors her own perfectly. He is also just desperate for a continual sequence of recognition. He's just using performance as a tool to force the world to acknowledge that he exists. So, as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with one seriously haunting question to chew on. When you look at your own life, against that constant looming threat of invisibility, look closely at the fragile threads holding your identity together. In your family, in your career, sitting right there in your own living room. Are you truly living your life? Or are you just desperately playing a part?